The House of Tudor was a royal house of Welsh and English origin, descended in the male line from the Tudors of Penmynydd. Tudor monarchs ruled the Kingdom of England and its realms, including their ancestral Wales and the Lordship of Ireland from 1485 until 1603, with 5 monarchs in that period. The first monarch, Henry VII, descended through his mother from a legitimised branch of the English royal House of Lancaster. The Tudor family rose to power in the wake of the Wars of the Roses, which left the House of Lancaster, to which the Tudors were aligned, extinct. Henry Tudor was able to establish himself as a candidate not only for traditional Lancastrian supporters, but also for the discontented supporters of the rival House of York, and he rose to capture the throne in battle, becoming King Henry VII. His victory was reinforced by his marriage to Elizabeth of York, daughter of King Edward IV, symbolically uniting the former warring factions under a new dynasty. The Tudors extended the power beyond modern England, achieving the full union of England and the Principality of Wales in 1542, and successfully asserting English authority over the Kingdom of Ireland. They also maintained the nominal English claim to the Kingdom of France, although none of them made substance of it. Henry VIII fought wars with France trying to reclaim that title. After him, his daughter Mary I lost control of all territory in France permanently with the fall of Calais in 1558. In total, 5 Tudor monarchs ruled the domains for just over a century. Henry VIII of England was the only male heir of Henry VII to live to the age of maturity. Issues around the royal succession became major political themes during the Tudor era. The House of Stuart came to power in 1603 when the Tudor line failed, as Elizabeth I died without a legitimate heir. Ascent to the throne. The Tudors are descended on Henry VII's mother's side from John Beaufort, 1st Earl of Somerset, one of the illegitimate children of the 14th-century English Prince John of Gaunt by Gaunt's long-term mistress Catherine Swynford. The descendants of an illegitimate child of English royalty would normally have no claim on the throne, but the situation was complicated when Gaunt and Swynford eventually married in 1396, when John Beaufort was 25. The Church retroactively declared the Beauforts legitimate by way of a papal bull the same year, confirmed by an Act of Parliament in 1397. A subsequent proclamation by John of Gaunt's legitimate son, Henry IV of England, also recognized the Beauforts' legitimacy but declared them ineligible ever to inherit the throne. Nevertheless, the Beauforts remained closely allied with Gaunt's legitimate descendants from his first marriage, the House of Lancaster. On the 1st of November 1455, John Beaufort's granddaughter, Margaret Beaufort, Countesses of Richmond and Derby, married Henry VI of England's half-brother Edmund Tudor, 1st Earl of Richmond. It was his father, Owen Tudor, who abandoned the Welsh patronymic naming practice and adopted a fixed surname. When he did not choose, as was generally the custom, his father's name, Maredudd, but chose that of his grandfather Tudur ap Goronwy, instead. This name is sometimes given as Tudor, the Welsh form of Theodore, but modern Welsh Tudur. Old Welsh Tudur is originally not a variant but a different and completely unrelated name, etymologically identical with Gaulish Tautorix, from Proto-Celtic *tutor, people, tribe, and *rix, king, corresponding to Germanic Theodoric. Owen Tudor was one of the bodyguards for the Queen Dowager Catherine of Valois, whose husband, Henry V of England, had died in 1422. Evidence suggests that the two were secretly married in 1429. The 2 sons born of the marriage, Edmund and Jasper, were among the most loyal supporters of the House of Lancaster in its struggle against the House of York. Henry VI ennobled his half-brothers. Edmund became the first Earl of Richmond on 15 December 1449 and was married to Margaret Beaufort, Countess of Stafford, the great-granddaughter of John of Gaunt, the progenitor of the House of Lancaster. Jasper became the first Earl of Pembroke on 23 November 1452. Edmund died on 3 November 1456. On 28 January 1457, his widow Margaret Beaufort, who had just attained her 14th birthday, gave birth to a son, Henry Tudor, at her brother-in-law's Pembroke Castle. Henry Tudor, the future Henry VII, spent his childhood at Raglan Castle, the home of William Herbert, 1st Earl of Pembroke, a leading Yorkist. Following the murder of Henry VI and death of his son, Edward, in 1471, Henry became the person upon whom the Lancastrian cause rested. Concerned for his young nephew's life, Jasper Tudor took Henry to Brittany for safety. Lady Margaret remained in England and remarried, living quietly while advancing the Lancastrian and her son's cause. Capitalizing on the growing unpopularity of King Richard III of England, she was able to forge an alliance with discontented Yorkists in support of her son. 2 years after Richard III was crowned, Henry and Jasper sailed from the mouth of the Seine to the Milford Haven waterway and defeated Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field. Upon this victory, Henry Tudor proclaimed himself King Henry VII. Henry VII. Upon becoming king, Henry's first concern was to secure his hold on the throne. On 18 January 1486 at Westminster, he honoured a pledge made 3 years earlier and married Elizabeth of York. They were third cousins, as both were great-great children of John of Gaunt. The marriage unified the warring houses of Lancaster and York and gave his children a strong claim to the throne. The unification of the two houses through this marriage is symbolized by the heraldic emblem of the Tudor rose, a combination of the white rose of York and the red rose of Lancaster. Henry VII and Queen Elizabeth had several children, 4 of whom survived infancy: Arthur, Prince of Wales; Henry, Duke of Richmond; Margaret, who married James IV of Scotland; and Mary, who married Louis XII of France. One of the objectives of Henry VII's foreign policy was dynastic security, which is portrayed through the alliance forged with the marriage of his daughter Margaret to James IV of Scotland and through the marriage of his eldest son. Henry VII married his son Arthur to Catherine of Aragon, cementing an alliance with the Spanish monarchs, Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile, and the two spent their honeymoon at Ludlow Castle, the traditional seat of the Prince of Wales. However, 4 months after the marriage, Arthur died, leaving his younger brother Henry as heir apparent. Henry VII acquired a papal dispensation allowing Prince Henry to marry Arthur's widow. However, Henry VII delayed the marriage. Henry VII limited his involvement in European politics. He went to war only twice, once in 1489 during the Breton crisis and the invasion of Brittany, and in 1496–1497 in revenge for Scottish support of Perkin and Warbeck and for their invasion of northern England. Henry VII made peace with France in 1492 and the war against Scotland was abandoned because of the Western Rebellion of 1497. Henry VII came to peace with James IV in 1502, paving the way for the marriage of his daughter Margaret. One of the main concerns of Henry VII during his reign was the reaccumulation of the funds in the royal treasury. England had never been one of the wealthier European countries, and after the War of the Roses this was even more true. Through his strict monetary strategy, he was able to leave a considerable amount of money in the treasury for his son and successor, Henry VIII. Although it is debated whether Henry VII was a great king, he certainly was a successful one, if only because he restored the nation's finances, strengthened the judicial system and successfully denied all other claimants to the throne, thus further securing it for his heir. Henry VIII. The new King Henry VIII married Catherine of Aragon on the 11th of June 1509. They were crowned at Westminster Abbey on the 24th of June the same year. Catherine was Henry's older brother's wife, making the path from the marriage a rocky one from the start. A papal dispensation had to be granted for Henry to be able to marry Catherine, and the negotiations took some time. Despite the fact that Henry's father died before he was married to Catherine, he was determined to marry her anyway and make sure that everyone knew he intended on being his own master. When Henry first came to the throne, he had very little interest in actually ruling. Rather, he preferred to indulge in luxuries and to partake in sports. He let others control the kingdom for the first 2 years of his reign, and then when he became more interested in military strategy, he took more interest in ruling his own throne. In his younger years, Henry was described as a man of gentle friendliness, gentle in debate, and who acted as more of a companion than a king. He was generous in his gifts and affection and was said to be easy to get along with. The Henry that many people picture when they hear his name is the Henry of his later years, when he became obese, volatile, and was known for his great cruelty. Catherine did not bear Henry the sons he was desperate for. Her first child, a daughter, was stillborn, and her second child, a son named Henry, Duke of Cornwall, died 52 days after birth. A further set of stillborn children were conceived, until a daughter Mary was born in 1516. When it became clear to Henry that the Tudor line was at risk, he consulted his chief minister Cardinal Thomas Wolsey about the possibility of annulling his marriage to Catherine. Along with Henry's concern that he would not have an heir, it was also obvious to his court that he was becoming tired of his aging wife, who was 6 years older than he. Wolsey visited Rome, where he hoped to get the Pope's consent for an annulment. However, the Church was reluctant to rescind the earlier papal dispensation and felt heavy pressure from Catherine's nephew, Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, in support of his aunt. Catherine contested the proceedings, and a protracted legal battle followed. Wolsey fell from favour as a result of his failure to procure the annulment, and Henry appointed Thomas Cromwell in his place. Despite his failure to produce the results that Henry wanted, Wolsey actively pursued the annulment. Divorce was synonymous with annulment at the time. However, he never planned that Henry would marry Anne Boleyn, with whom the king had become enamored while she was lady-in-waiting in Queen Catherine's household. It is unclear how far Wolsey was actually responsible for the Reformation, but it is very clear that Henry's desire to marry Anne Boleyn precipitated the schism with the Church. Henry's concern about having an heir to secure his family line and increase his security while alive would have prompted him to ask for a divorce sooner or later, whether Anne had precipitated it or not. Only Wolsey's sudden death at Leicester on his journey to the Tower of London saved him from the public humiliation and inevitable execution he would have suffered upon his arrival at the Tower. Break with Rome. In order to allow Henry to divorce his wife, the English Parliament enacted laws breaking ties with Rome, and declaring the king supreme head of the Church of England, thus severing the ecclesiastical structure of England from the Catholic Church and the Pope. The newly appointed Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, was then able to declare Henry's marriage to Catherine annul. Catherine was removed from court, and she spent the last 3 years of her life in various English houses under protectorship, similar to house arrest. This allowed Henry to marry one of his courtiers, Anne Boleyn, the daughter of a minor diplomat Sir Thomas Boleyn. Anne had become pregnant by the end of 1532 and gave birth on the 7th of September 1533 to Elizabeth, named in honour of Henry's mother. Anne may have had later pregnancies which ended in miscarriage or stillbirth. In May 1536, Anne was arrested, along with 6 courtiers. Thomas Cromwell stepped in again, claiming that Anne had taken lovers during her marriage to Henry, and she was tried for high treason, witchcraft and incest. These charges were most likely fabricated, but she was found guilty, and executed in May 1536. Protestant Alliance. Henry married again, for the 3rd time, to Jane Seymour, the daughter of a Wiltshire knight, and with whom he had become enamored while she was still a lady-in-waiting to Queen Anne. Jane became pregnant, and in 1537 produced a son, who became King Edward VI following Henry's death in 1547. Jane died of puerperal fever only a few days after the birth, leaving Henry devastated. Cromwell continued to gain the king's favour when he designed and pushed through the Laws in Wales Acts, uniting England and Wales. In 1540 Henry married for the 4th time to the daughter of a Protestant German Duke, Anne of Cleves, thus forming an alliance with the Protestant German states. Henry was reluctant to marry again, especially to a Protestant, but he was persuaded when the court painter Hans Holbein the Younger showed him a flattering portrait of her. She arrived in England in December 1539, and Henry rode to Rochester to meet her on the 1st of January 1540. Although the historian Gilbert Burnet claimed that Henry called her a Flanders mare, there is no evidence that he said this. In truth, court ambassadors negotiating the marriage praised her beauty. Whatever the circumstances were, the marriage failed, and Anne agreed to a peaceful annulment, assumed the title My Lady, the king's sister, and received a massive divorce settlement, which included Richmond Palace, Hever Castle, and numerous other estates across the country. Although the marriage made sense in terms of foreign policy, Henry was still enraged and offended by the match. Henry chose to blame Cromwell for the failed marriage, and ordered him beheaded on the 28th of July 1540. Henry kept his word and took care of Anne in his last years alive. However, after his death Anne suffered from extreme financial hardship because Edward VI's councillors refused to give her any funds and confiscated the homes she had been given. She pleaded to her brother to let her return home, but he only sent a few agents who tried to assist in helping her situation and refused to let her return home. Anne died on the 16th of July 1557 in Chelsea Manor. The 5th marriage was to the Catholic Catherine Howard, the niece of Thomas Howard, the 3rd Duke of Norfolk, who was promoted by Norfolk in the hope that she would persuade Henry to restore the Catholic religion in England. Henry called her his rose without a thorn, but the marriage ended in failure. Henry's fancy with Catherine started before the end of his marriage with Anne when she was still a member of Anne's court. Catherine was young and vivacious, but Henry's age made him less inclined to use Catherine in the bedroom. Rather, he preferred to admire her, which Catherine soon grew tired of. Catherine, forced into a marriage to an unattractive, obese man over 30 years her senior, had never wanted to marry Henry, and conducted an affair with the king's favourite, Thomas Culpeper, while Henry and she were married. During her questioning, Catherine first denied everything, but eventually she was broken down and told of her infidelity and her prenuptial relations with other men. Henry, first enraged, threatened to torture her to death, but later became overcome with grief and self-pity. She was accused of treason and was executed on the 13th of February 1542, destroying the English Catholic holdouts' hopes of a national reconciliation with the Catholic Church. Her execution also marked the the end of the Howard family's power within the court. By the time Henry conducted another Protestant marriage with his final wife Catherine Parr in 1543, the old Roman Catholic advisers, including the powerful third Duke of Norfolk, had lost all the power and influence. The Duke himself was still a committed Catholic, and he was nearly persuaded to arrest Catherine for preaching Lutheran doctrines to Henry while she attended his ill health. However, she managed to reconcile with the king after vowing that she had only argued about religion with him to take his mind off the suffering caused by his ulcerous leg. Her peacemaking also helped reconcile Henry with his daughters Mary and Elizabeth and fostered a good relationship between her and the Crown Prince. Meanwhile, Edward was brought up as a strict and devout Protestant by numerous tutors, including Bishop Richard Cox, John Belmayne, and Sir John Chequy. The lady in charge of his upbringing was Blanche Herbert, Lady Troy, whose ancestors had residual Lollard connections. Her elegy includes the lines, ... To King Edward she was a true, wise lady of dignity, in charge of his fosterage. ... Edward VI Protestant zeal. Henry died on the 28th of January 1547. His will had reinstated his daughters by his annulled marriages to Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn to the line of succession, but did not legitimize them. In the event that all three of his children died without heirs, the will stipulated that the descendants of his younger sister Mary would take precedence over the descendants of his elder sister, Margaret, Queen of Scotland. Edward, his 9-year-old son by Jane Seymour, succeeded as Edward VI of England. Unfortunately, the young king's kingdom was usually in turmoil between nobles who were trying to strengthen their own positions in the kingdom by using the regency in the favour Duke of Somerset's England. Although Henry had specified a group of men to act as regents during Edward's minority, Edward Seymour, Edward's uncle, quickly seized complete control, and created himself Duke of Somerset on the 15th of February 1547. His domination of the Privy Council, the king's most senior body of advisers, was unchallenged. Somerset aimed to unite England and Scotland by marrying Edward to the young Scottish Queen Mary, and aimed to forcibly impose the English Reformation on the Church of Scotland. Somerset led a large and well-equipped army to Scotland, where he and the Scottish regent James Hamilton, 2nd Earl of Arran, commanded their armies at the Battle of Pinkie-Cleugh on the 10th of September 1547. Somerset's army eventually defeated the Scots, but the young Queen Mary was smuggled to France, where she was betrothed to the Dauphin, the future Francis II of France. Despite Somerset's disappointment that no Scottish marriage would take place, his victory at Pinkie-Cleugh made his position appear unassailable. Meanwhile, Edward VI, despite the fact that he was only a child of 9, had his mind set on religious reform. In 1549, Edward ordered the publication of the Book of Common Prayer, containing the forms of worship for daily and Sunday church services. The controversial new book was not welcomed by either reformers or Catholic conservatives. It was especially condemned in Devon and Cornwall, where traditional Catholic loyalty was at its strongest. In Cornwall at the time, many of the people could only speak the Cornish language, so the uniform English Bibles and church services were not understood by many. This caused the Prayer Book Rebellion, in which groups of Cornish nonconformists gathered round the mayor. The rebellion worried Somerset, now Lord Protector, and he sent an army to impose military solution to the rebellion. 1 in 10 of the indigenous Cornish population was slaughtered. The rebellion did not persuade Edward to tread carefully, and only hardened his attitude towards Catholic nonconformists. This extended to Edward's elder sister, the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, Mary Tudor, who was a pious and devout Catholic. Although called before the Privy Council several times to renounce her faith and stop hearing the Catholic Mass, she refused. He had a good relationship with his sister Elizabeth, who was a Protestant, albeit a moderate one. But this was strained when Elizabeth was accused of having an affair with the Duke of Somerset's brother, Thomas Seymour, 1st Baron Seymour of Sudeley, the husband of Henry's last wife Catherine Parr. Elizabeth was interviewed by one of Edward's advisers, and she was eventually found not to be guilty, despite forced confessions from her servants Catherine Ashley and Thomas Parry. Thomas Seymour was arrested and beheaded on the 20th of March 1549. Problematic succession. Lord Protector Somerset was also losing favour, after forcibly removing Edward VI to Windsor Castle, with the intention of keeping him hostage. Somerset was removed from power by members of the council, led by his chief rival, John Dudley, the 1st Earl of Warwick, who created himself Duke of Northumberland shortly after his rise. Northumberland effectively became Lord Protector, but he did not use this title, learning from the mistakes his predecessor made. Northumberland was furiously ambitious, and aimed to secure Protestant uniformity while making himself rich with land and money in the process. He ordered churches to be stripped of all traditional Catholic symbolism, resulting in the simplicity often seen in Church of England churches today. A revision of the Book of Common Prayer was published in 1552. When Edward VI became ill in 1553, his advisers looked to the possible imminent accession of the Catholic Lady Mary, and feared that she would overturn all the reforms made during Edward's reign. Perhaps surprisingly, it was the dying Edward himself who feared a return to Catholicism, and wrote a new will repudiating the 1544 will of Henry VIII. This gave the throne to his cousin Lady Jane Grey, the granddaughter of Henry VIII's sister Mary Tudor, who, after the death of Louis XII of France in 1515, had married Henry VIII's favourite Charles Brandon, the 1st Duke of Suffolk. Lady Jane's mother was Lady Frances Brandon, the daughter of Suffolk and Princess Mary. Northumberland married Jane to his youngest son Guilford Dudley, allowing himself to get the most out of a necessary Protestant succession. Most of Edward's council signed the devise for the succession, and when Edward VI died on 6 July 1553 from his battle with tuberculosis, Lady Jane was proclaimed Queen. However, the popular support for the rightful successor Mary, even though she was Catholic, overruled Northumberland's plans, and Jane, who had never wanted to accept the crown, was deposed after just 9 days. Mary's supporters joined her in a triumphal procession to London, accompanied by her younger sister Elizabeth.